Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little less academic and a lot more monastic. A quiet walk through the candlelit corridors of medieval devotion. Yes, they really lived like that, but trust me, things got deeper, and sometimes surprisingly profound. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's tempting to imagine the Middle Ages as a grim, silent void. But tonight, you'll see that inside a monastery silence wasn't emptiness. It was everything. It begins not with sound, but with silence. A silence so deep, it felt ancient, older than the stones that framed the arched cloister. Older even than the breath of the wind that touched the ivy-draped walls. In this stillness, in the hushed breath of the world, stood a monastery, hidden among hills kissed by dawn mist, wrapped in a cloak of time. There, the candlelight was not merely light, it was memory, a flicker against the cold stone, dancing gently, illuminating the worn grooves of the granite where countless hands once passed in prayer, each flame a whisper, each shadow a secret. And above it all, the air hung thick with incense and silence, sacred silence, the kind that listens more than it speaks. Can time stand still? Or does it simply kneel here, in robes of wool, behind these heavy oak doors? The monastery did not rise from ambition, but from retreat, a sanctuary carved not from power, but from humility. Its bell tower reached not for heaven, but for stillness, casting no shadow of pride, only a rhythm for prayer. Monks moved like echoes through stone corridors, their footsteps soft, deliberate, as if to not disturb the eternal slumber of God. Hoods drawn, eyes lowered, hands clasped, not from fear, but reverence. Their days began in the darkest hour, when even the stars blinked slower, and the only sound was breath and the low drone of Gregorian chant. Oh, that chant, low and earthy, like a hum drawn from the marrow of the earth, yet lifted gently toward something celestial. Not song, but surrender. Not art, but offering. And within those notes, ancient and unadorned, lived a language older than tongues, the language of longing, of becoming less, so the soul might become more. Is not silence the purest prayer? And if words are stones, is quiet the garden where truth blooms? Their routine was a wheel, turning always, steady and sure. Matins before dawn, lauds with the morning light, hours marked by bells, not urgency but remembrance. Each act, from tilling the soil to copying sacred texts, was imbued with presence. Monotony transformed into meditation, labor into liturgy. In the scriptorium, a single monk dipped his quill into ink as black as nightfall. He moved slowly, copying letters, older than kingdoms, each stroke deliberate. His hands knew they were not writing for today. They wrote for centuries hence, for the eyes that would come long after his bones were dust, for souls yet unborn, seeking the divine in curling lines and faded vellum. Does a word written in solitude echo louder across time? Outside, the world turned its wheels, kings fell, wars roared, cities burned and bloomed, but within these walls, time rippled differently. Here, the soul was not measured by ambition, but by surrender. Not by noise, but stillness. Here, a man's greatness lay not in his voice, but in how well he listened, to the wind across the stone, to the silence behind the chant, to the space between thoughts, and in listening, he began to change, slowly, as stone changes, not through force, but through the quiet persistence of water. He was not escaping the world. He was descending into it, into its quiet heart. What if the path to the divine is inward, and the ladder to heaven begins in the soil? As the sun rose, golden through high stained glass, the bells rang once more. A gentle note, a reminder, another turning of the wheel, another breath in the long, slow rhythm of monastic life. And so it began. The bell had rung, not with triumph, but with tenderness. Its echo wandered through cloister and courtyard like a barefoot pilgrim, touching each stone, stirring each shadow. Morning had entered the monastery not with haste, but like dew, quietly, reverently, soft as the whisper of linen robes against flagstone floors. And in this fragile hour, when sunlight first stained the eastern arches with pale gold, the monastery awakened not with noise, but with breath, the breath of life lived deliberately, the breath of souls aligned to rhythm, not rush. In the garden cloister, a few monks gathered, not to speak, but to be. Feet brushed gravel, robes swayed with the wind's passage, and hands moved through herb beds, fingers tender against sage, lavender, and rue. They did not harvest with greed, but with gratitude, for each leaf carried meaning, each root a secret of healing passed down from the mouths of ancient healers who once whispered to plants as one might to old friends. Can the soul grow like time, if given the right silence? The monastery's garden was not mere sustenance, it was scripture in green. The way mint reached toward morning, the patience of rosemary through frost, the humility of moss that never demanded the sun, these were sermons in silence, if one knew how to read them. A young monk, Brother Nereus, bent to pluck calendula petals with fingers that once trembled with the weight of swords. He had come to the monastery not in peace, but in collapse, a man unmade. And yet here, in this soil, he began again, not through sermons, but seeds. His scars had faded into calluses. His prayers were quiet now, found more often in the furrow of earth than in the chapel. What if repentance is not a word but a garden? In the kitchens, warmth bloomed from the hearth as simple fare was prepared. Oats, dried fruits, bread from yesterday's baking, still sweet with the breath of yeast and thyme. Everything was enough. Not abundance, not lack, but the sacred, in between, where desire becomes still and hunger becomes holy. Even in the refectory, where the monks dined in silence, there was conversation, not through words, but through glances, through the clink of wooden spoon to bowl, through the gratitude in the bowed head before a meal. A communion of quiet souls. Is speech the only language, or can presence itself be a voice? Later, in the scriptorium, the golden light had risen high enough to kiss the stained glass windows, ruby and sapphire and emerald, casting coloured dreams upon the stone floor. Ancient tales of saints and martyrs played in light and glass, while the monks copied older stories, still pages of psalms, of Apocrypha, of Aristotle and Augustine, of herbal cures and divine mysteries. The script was more than ink, it was meditation in motion. Quills glided like swans across vellum. Ink pooled like starlight in each loop and ligature. They wrote not just to preserve, but to remember. For memory, too, was sacred, and what the world forgot. The monastery remembered. There, a single monk paused, lifting his pen mid-stroke. He stared not at the page, but out the arched window, where a raven perched on a branch, silhouetted against the sky. Was it an omen, a messenger, or merely a creature being as it was made to be. And still the question lingered in his chest, like incense clinging to robes. Is all of creation trying to tell us something, or are we simply learning how to listen? The bell rang again, marking the hour of prayer, and like a tide turning, the monks rose, some from ink, some from soil, some from thought, and they flowed through the cloisters like a single breath, inhaling toward the chapel, toward something deeper. Light bent through the halls in long shafts. Dust danced like stars made humble. And above it all, the chant began once more. Low, ancient, unearthly, dot. And so the day continued, not forward, but inward, the chant had begun, soft as smoke, deep as earth. It drifted from the chapel's mouth like the breath of the monastery itself, not from one throat, but from many, woven into one slow river of sound. It did not demand attention. It invited surrender. There were no harmonies crafted by ego, only notes bowed in reverence to something unseen. Within the chapel, light filtered through stained glass as if time itself were being translated into color. Ruby for sacrifice, sapphire for stillness, gold for the divine that hides within the ordinary. The stone walls held centuries of breath. They did not echo the chant, they absorbed it, carrying the memory of every note ever sung into their cool, sacred pause. The monks stood in rows, cowled and still, each a shadow wrapped in cloth, each a vessel, not of thought, but of devotion. Their bodies did not move, but their voices did, rising and falling like wheat in a windless field. Even the youngest monk, Brother Thomas, who still wrestled with the restless pulse of youth, closed his eyes now, and for a moment felt the chant carry him beyond himself. Where does the soul go when it listens, truly listens? The candles flickered, casting soft halos against carved pillars. On the altar, a simple wooden cross stood, not gilded, not ornate, just wood, worn smooth by time and touch. And behind it, the chapel's apse curved like a cupped hand, as if heaven itself leaned in to hear what earth was whispering. They sang not for an audience, but for the echo in eternity, and still, in that hush between phrases, something more was heard, not silence, not breath, but presence, the presence, a great waiting, a stillness so complete, it seemed to breathe with them. Was it God, or simply the soul, awakened and listening at last? Can a man become a cathedral if he empties himself enough? As the chant deepened, something changed. The room, the bodies, the voices, all blurred into one. Time became soft. Identity softer. Even the walls of the chapel faded at the edges, as if the space were stretching wider, opening like a petal toward some unseen sun. This was not performance. This was remembrance of a time before names, before thoughts, before the illusion of separateness. In chant, they returned, not to the past, but to the center. Brother Nereus, the one soldier, felt tears bloom quietly beneath his closed lids, not of sorrow, not of joy, but of recognition. The chant was not healing him. It was revealing the part of him that had never been broken, the part that had always known silence, that had always known peace. Could it be that the soul was never lost, only covered? And then, as gently as it had risen, the chant fell away. A final note lingered, pure, singular, suspended like a drop of water trembling before it falls. And when it finally dissolved into the air, the silence that followed was deeper than before, not empty, but full. The monks stood motionless, listening not just with ears, but with breath, with skin, with soul. In that stillness, Questions became answers, and answers dissolved back into questions. Then, without signal, the monks turned, one by one. No rush, no sound, a tide receding, not to vanish, but to return again. The sun had now risen fully. The light was warmer, brighter, yet nothing in the world outside. The chapel had changed, only the eyes that saw it is transformation. Not the changing of things, but the changing of how we see. Outside, the bell would ring again soon. The day would resume its rhythm of ink, of soil, of silence. But in the hearts of those cloaked figures, something had already shifted, and so they walked, not into the next task, but into a deeper layer of the same unfolding. They stepped out of the chapel, not as men, but as stillness, clothed in skin. The air met them with the hush of morning fully awakened, the kind of silence that only comes after song, when the world pauses to listen to what remains. There was no chatter, no urgency, only the faint rustle of robes against stone and the low call of a dove nesting in the eaves. And so they returned, each to his appointed labor, to his silent liturgy. Brother Nereus moved to the olive grove that stretched along the southern wall, gnarled trees bowing with quiet wisdom, their silver leaves trembling faintly in the breeze. He carried no tools, only his hands, and a reverent gaze that treated each branch as if it were a scripture in green dot. To touch the earth was not to toil, it was to pray with the body. Can devotion live in fingers? Can love be learned through tending? As he gently guided a limb upward with a wooden brace, he remembered how once he had raised weapons, how strange it seemed now. That strength had once meant striking, and now it meant holding, not tightly, but wisely, like the way the monastery held its people, not as prisoners, but as pilgrims in rest. Elsewhere, in the vaulted stone cellar, Brother Anselm fed the fire that warmed the bread ovens. The light of the flames painted his face in flickering golds, and for a moment he looked like a figure carved from amber. He worked in rhythm, hands dusted with flour, moving dough as though sculpting silence itself. The bread would rise slowly. There was no rush. Here, even fermentation was a kind of worship, a sacred waiting. The monks did not fear time. They folded it, like cloth, into their rituals. They made peace with the hours, and in return, the hours became holy. What if slowness is not delay, but depth? Above them, in a small chamber lit by a single high window, Brother Aldrich sat hunched over a codex, the spine worn, the pages velvet with age. He was the monastery's chronicler, keeper of memory. Today, he wrote of weather, not storms or drama, just the subtle changes, the warmth in the breeze, the bloom of an early flower, the passing of a fox beneath the cloister arch. To him, these were not small things. They were the breath of God, exhaled gently through the world. Outside, 2 monks tended to the bees, their hoods drawn low, not in fear, but in reverence. The bees moved in spirals, golden, humming, holy. Their hive was a monastery within, a monastery ordered, silent, tireless, and the honey they made tasted not just of sweetness, but of sunlight, of lavender, of the slow magic of the seasons. Even the bees prayed, in their way. Even their hum was a chant. In the refectory, Brother Thomas quietly scrubbed the stone floor. The work was hard, but there was joy in the rhythm, the brush moving in slow arcs, the coolness of water on warm hands. He did not long for higher tasks, nor did he resent the labor, for here even scrubbing could be sanctified. Even the floor, beneath one's knees could be an altar. Is the sacred found above or beneath us? By midday, the sun cast long bars of light through the arched windows. Dust motes danced in slow spirals. The bell rang again, and they paused, wherever they were, in whatever motion they had begun. Not to cease, but to realign. A brief prayer, a breath, a bow, then back to their quiet rituals. There was no applause in the monastery, no reward, no accolades, and yet, in that humble rhythm of sweeping, planting, baking, scribing, a deeper satisfaction unfurled, one not bound by ego, but by essence. They were not trying to become anything. They were trying to remember what they already were. Perhaps the soul is not a ladder to climb, but a garden to tend. As the light softened toward the golden hush of late afternoon, a hush settled upon the halls once more. The monks, each in his way, moved gently through the last hours of labor, and the air seemed to thicken, not with weariness, but with peace. The day was beginning its descent. The sun tilted. The shadows stretched like monks in long robes, and somewhere in the garden a bellflower trembled, as if it, too, had heard the quiet call to vespers. The light withdrew slowly, like a monk leaving chapel, backwards, head bowed. It slipped through the last of the stained glass windows, gilding the cloisters with farewell hues. Ochre, rose, a soft blue, like the underside of a dove's wing. Shadows followed like obedient novices, stretching long across the flagstones, weaving between the columns like ancient prayers that never ended, only changed shape. The monastery, which never truly stirred, now settled even further, as if the very stones exhaled. Brother Nereus sat in the herb garden once more, though the day's work was done. His hands rested in his lap, still dusted with earth. He watched the sky turn amber behind the olive trees, the branches swaying in quiet thought. Around him, basil sighed in the breeze, and chamomile folded in on itself. Even the flowers knew how to close, how to rest, how to trust the coming dark. How many souls forget the wisdom of petals? Nearby, Brother Thomas walked the cloister alone, not to go anywhere, but to walk within. His sandals whispered across the worn stone, and he touched the smooth pillars with passing fingertips, as if confirming that yes, this place was real, and so was he. The evening made the monastery softer, more dreamlike, as though it belonged to both worlds at once, one of stone, one of spirit. The bell rang, not with declaration, but with invitation. Vespers, evening prayer. The monks emerged again, quiet shadows converging toward the chapel. No words, only motion, the rustle of habits, the creak of an ancient door opening, the subtle hush that descends when the world grows thin, when the veil between what is seen and what is sacred shimmers just slightly. Inside, candles had already been lit, small flames flickering like thoughts held lightly dot. No torches, no firelight to boast, just humble wicks and beeswax, golden, patient, kind. The chant rose once more, but this time it carried the sound of dusk, lower, slower, a melody dipped in twilight. The voices had the weight of a day lived in silence, a day sown with invisible seeds. They did not sing to be heard, they sang to be known by the stillness that watches all things, to be known by themselves, beyond name, beyond body. Isn't that what prayer truly is? Remembering what you are beneath the noise. As the chant unfolded, Brother Aldrich closed his eyes. He had spent hours with manuscripts today, deciphering pages inked by hands now long buried, voices that once quivered with the same questions. What is truth? Where does peace dwell? And yet, in this chant, He felt closer to them than any word could bring. It was as if the past, too, were humming along, through stone, through breath, through memory. Even the dead come to vespers, if one knows how to listen. Far above, a lone bat stirred in the chapel rafters, wings twitching in the candlelight. Outside, the sky deepened to indigo, and Venus blinked, open like an ancient eye. The first star, the signal of surrender. The chant came to its end, not abruptly, but like a boat drifting into fog, where sound and silence become the same. The monks bowed in unison, a gesture as old as time. They left the chapel slowly, again in silence. But this silence was fuller now, not empty, but full of presence, as if the air itself had thickened with peace. The monastery did not speak, and yet it answered something deep within each of them. Back in their cells, they lit their own candles, each flame a sentinel, each shadow a companion. The walls were bare, the beds simple, but there was beauty in the restraint, a kind of clarity, no distraction, just breath and being and God. Brother Thomas lay on his cot, facing the small window where moonlight now pooled. He whispered a single word into the night, not as a prayer, but as a thank you, a quiet acknowledgement that he had been given another day, not to achieve, but to return. What if the purpose of life is not to build, but to become still enough to receive? Outside, the owls had begun their songs, the monastery faded into the hush of night, and in the candlelit dark, where each flame danced like a soul in longing, the silence grew deeper still, not absence, but intimacy. The stars blinked above quiet witnesses to a world within walls and a world beyond. Darkness had settled like a velvet cloak, soft and heavy, not to smother the monastery, but to wrap it in contemplation. The stars above were not distant, they were watchful, ancient, intimate. Like monks of the sky, they held their silence with purpose, each one a glowing whisper in the vast cathedral of the heavens. Moonlight spilled gently across the cloistered garden, catching on dew, turning leaves into silver prayers. Inside, the monastery had grown still, more still than stone, more silent than shadow. Each monk had retired to his cell, not as escape, but as return. These cells, plain and narrow, were not prisons. They were vessels, rooms carved not for the body's comfort, but for the soul's unveiling. Their simplicity was the very thing that made them vast. Brother Thomas sat cross-legged on his straw-ledged cot, candle burning low beside him. His breath had slowed, not from sleep yet, but from reverence. He gazed at the flame, watched it sway as if stirred by invisible chants still echoing in the walls. The flame was small, yet it danced with the grace of eternity, and in its glow, the shadows on the wall moved like memories. He had begun to understand that silence is not empty, it is a language, and in this place, every stone, every flicker, every breath was saying something, not in words, but in presence. The question was not what is being said, but can you become still enough to hear it? Is silence the original scripture? Below the chapel, beneath the very stones they had walked all day, lay the crypt, cool and unvisited at this hour. But there, too, something breathed, not ghost, not fear, but memory. The monks of centuries past, their bones folded into the earth, their names worn away by time, still lingered in some unseen fashion. They were not gone, they had simply become part of the silence, and perhaps the silence had become part of them. Brother Nereus, awake in his cell, could feel that depth tonight. He did not fear the dead, He had known war. True fear lived in noise, in cries, in fire, in forgetting. But here, death was not the end of music. It was the fading of one note into the next, unbroken. He knelt beside his cot, not to speak, but to listen. And in that act, head bowed, heart open, the night seemed to lean in closer. The walls softened. The dark grew luminous. There, with no vision, no revelation, only presence, the kind that asked nothing, gave everything. Sometimes, the most sacred thing is what does not arrive. Far outside the walls, the world continued. Villagers slept. Wolves wandered. Fires died. A child might have cried. A woman might have prayed. The moon listened to them all. But here, within these sacred boundaries, the monastery remained untouched by time. And yet, in another way, it contained all of time. What if peace is not the absence of movement, but the fullness of being? The candle beside Brother Thomas finally gave its last flutter. The flame bowed, sighed, and vanished. Darkness returned, not as enemy, but as teacher, and so he lay down, facing the window that now framed only stars. His breath matched the rhythm of the night. Slow, steady, gentle. No dreams had come yet, but something within him had already begun to drift, not away, but inward, into the stillness behind thought, into the monastery that lived within the soul. Outside, the night deepened. The owl fell silent. Even the wind stepped softly, and in that perfect stillness the monastery slept. But the silence did not. It listened. It listened. Night did not pass through the monastery. It lingered, like incense clinging to the folds of a robe. It did not hurry, nor did it sleep. It watched, and in its watchfulness, dreams were born. Not loud, not wild, but soft as breath, rising from the hidden hollows of the soul like mist from ancient earth. In the small stone cell where Brother Thomas lay, something stirred, not outside. Within. He was not fully asleep, not fully awake, suspended in the space between. That secret chamber where visions slip past reason's gate and symbols rise like stars. His chest rose slowly, his brow was calm, and behind his closed eyes a candle still burned, not the one snuffed by night, but another, deeper, older. He dreamed he was walking, not through stone corridors, but through a forest of pillars, reaching endlessly into a sky that had no ceiling. Light poured through unseen windows, and the air smelled of parchment and myrrh. There were voices, not speaking, but humming, as if the wind itself carried a chant older than scripture. His bare feet touched warm earth, and each step felt like a prayer. He passed a tree rooted in stone, its leaves made of vellum, its fruit of inked letters. As he reached for one, it crumbled in his hand and vanished. But the word it carried settled into his chest, and stayed. Somewhere in the depths of the monastery, a bell rang in his dream, but it did not toll time. It told understanding. And then he saw them. The monks who were no longer living, seated in silence beneath an arch of stars. Their faces glowed with the gentleness of those who have no need to speak. Their eyes held something strange, not pity, not warning, but recognition. One of them lifted a hand and pointed, not forward, but inward. Brother Thomas understood. The monastery was not just stone and vine and prayer. It was the body, the soul. It was himself, and all its halls, all its shadows, all its shadows, all its sacred silences, they were mirrored in his being. Could it be that sanctuary is not built, but remembered? He awoke, but gently, as if the dream had chosen to withdraw, bowing its head and slipping quietly through the seams of consciousness. The sky outside his window had softened to the faintest grey. Not yet dawn, but no longer night. That holy hour where nothing stirs, but everything breathes. Elsewhere in the monastery, other monks stirred from sleep, not abruptly, but as if summoned by something softer than bells. They rose without words, washed without hurry, and stepped into the corridor lighted only by silence. Brother Aldrich lit his candle with care, watching the wick catch flame as though greeting an old companion. He whispered a psalm under his breath, not from memory, but from longing. Down in the kitchen, Brother Anselm began preparing the morning's bread. His fingers moved with the calm knowledge of one who had made thousands of loaves, yet never made the same one twice. The dough took shape in silence, each fold, each press, a kind of love. He did not rush the rising, for the bread needed time to become itself. And high in the scriptorium, a crow called once from the rooftop, a black mark against the brightening sky. Brother Nereus heard it and smiled faintly. Even the loud things, the dark things, had their place in the great hush of this world. As the light inched its way through narrow windows, the bell finally rang once, twice, in slow, low tones. Lords. The prayer of early morning. The monks gathered once more, robes brushing stone, footsteps like heartbeat. No urgency, no resistance. They came not to begin the day, but to continue the silence that had never truly ended. And as they entered the chapel once more, a thought echoed within them, unspoken, but shared. What if each day is not new, but ancient, returning again in gentler form? The candles were lit, the chant began, and outside, the sky whispered its first full breath. The first light did not burst. It crept, reverent, slow, and golden. It entered the monastery not as a guest, but as a familiar presence, as one who had lived 1,000 mornings in these same halls, watching the same stones drink the same light. The sun, like the monks themselves, did not shout. It offered slivers of warmth spilled across the chapel floor, turning cold stone into radiant gold. The chant rose to meet it, not louder, but fuller, a slow current of sound moving through arches and air like incense, like river mist, like breath rising from sacred waters. Brother Thomas stood among them, his voice joining the others in gentle harmony, not for performance, not even for beauty, but because some songs are older than language, and the body remembers them when the world grows still. As the final note of the chant faded, it did not end, it dissolved into silence, into the breath between acts, into the listening that follows truth. They bowed and filed out, not with haste, but with presence. Outside, the garden had begun to waken. Bees hummed, shyly at first, then with more confidence, as petals unfolded in the soft touch of morning. Dew clung to lavender stems like blessings waiting to be noticed. A butterfly, pale and slow-winged, drifted past Brother Nereus. As he trimmed the rosemary, he paused, not to admire it, but to witness it. And that, too, was prayer. Not all kneeling is done indoors. In the kitchen, warm bread emerged from the oven, its crust golden, its scent rich with memory. Brother Anselm laid the loaves out like offerings on rough linen. He wiped his hands and murmured a quiet grace, a whisper between himself and the unseen. Is not every act done with care a form of worship? The refectory filled gradually. Wooden bowls, fresh cheese, a pot of nettle tea steaming softly. The monks ate together without talk. The silence at table was not stern, it was spacious. Each man folded within his own awareness, yet deeply connected. No one clung to thoughts here, they passed, like clouds across the mind's sky. Brother Aldrich sat near the window, chewing slowly. A shaft of sunlight had fallen across the table, catching the rim of his cup. In it, he saw tiny particles dancing, not dust, but ancient things. Bits of time, echoes of those who had sat here centuries before. Perhaps one of them, long ago, had looked up from this same bowl of bread and seen the same morning light. What if time was not a river flowing forward, but a wheel, circling round, bearing souls into familiar light? After the meal, the brothers moved into their daily labors, the rhythm of the monastery like breath. Inhale in prayer, exhale in work. Brother Tomos returned to the scriptorium, where the sacred and the ink met again. He unrolled the parchment with slow hands. The page was blank, save for one gilded letter, the beginning of a new illumination. He did not rush to fill it. He stared at the single letter for a long while, letting it speak to him. The gold caught the sun and shimmered, as though the word itself breathed. He dipped the quill into ink and made the next stroke. Outside, the bell did not ring. The wind turned a page, somewhere unseen, and the monastery, alive with stillness, rich with motionless depth, continued its quiet unfolding, not towards glory, not towards ambition, but toward deeper knowing. The day would unfold slowly, like the petals of a monastic rose, and each monk would move within it like a note in a long, unbroken hymn. And above them, the sun continued its silent chant, laying gold across their shoulders, as if reminding them, you are here, and that is enough, is enough. Midday approached not with fanfare, but with a hush that shimmered. The sun, now higher, poured its warmth across the slanted rooftops, turning moss into emerald and stone into gold-dappled shadow. There was no bustle here, no clamour of carts or the clang of coins, only the soft rhythm of sacred routine, as if the very day were praying. In the fields just beyond the cloister wall, Brother Cillian moved with slow precision through rows of cabbages and wintergreens. His robe, knotted high for work, brushed the soil like a forgotten hymn. His hands, rough, honest, unhurried, lifted each leaf with tenderness. He did not toil to conquer the earth, but to listen to it. Each root, each stem was a verse, each worm in the soil a psalm of humility, each droplet of sweat on his brow an offering silent, sacred, surrendered. He had once been a knight, a wielder of iron and will, but here, in this monastery, he had traded the sword for the spade, not in defeat, but in devotion. Was it weakness to give up the world, or strength to grow gentle within it? Elsewhere, Brother Aldrich sharpened tools at the smithy near the south wall. The rasp of stone against blade echoed in the warm air, steady and rhythmic, like a slow heartbeat. Sparks flared now and then, but not with violence. They danced and vanished like thoughts, too fleeting to hold. He paused once to look up, and in that pause, time itself seemed to still. A breeze drifted through, carrying the scent of time and old parchment. A bell sounded faintly in the distance, not a call, but a reminder. You are here, you are alive, you are not what you do, but how you do it. Brother Tomos, in the scriptorium, had finished the golden border of a psalm, the letter M, now glowing like sunlight trapped in paint, curved with a quiet joy. He leaned back and exhaled, not from exhaustion, but from reverence. Each letter he copied was more than a symbol. It was a seed of silence, a seed of truth, a seed of eternity planted in ink outside. Birds flitted between the fig trees that lined the stone path near the herb garden. The buzz of bees, the flap of wings, the soft whisper of leaves, they did not interrupt the silence of the monastery. They were its voice. Brother Anselm, kneeling among the marigolds, whispered names of saints as he gathered petals for the infirmary salve. He believed flowers listened, not with ears, but with essence. Perhaps we, too, are meant to listen that way. At midday, the bell tolled again, slow, deep, and low, like a breath drawn from the belly of the earth. The monks paused in their labor. Tools were set down, hands wiped clean, and like streams returning to a river, they flowed back toward the cloister. The refectory filled once more, a bowl of lentils, a crust of bread, a drizzle of oil, nothing more, and yet nothing less. The silence around the table held them like a cloak, soft, steady, grounding. One could almost hear the thoughts drift between them, gentle as dandelion seeds. What is enough? Is the hand more blessed when it gives, or when it opens to receive? Is there such a thing as ordinary, when the soul is fully present? When the meal was done, Brother Nereus remained seated a moment longer. He stared down at the crumbs left on his wooden plate, remnants of a meal, or perhaps a sacred geometry written in wheat and time. Then slowly he smiled and rose. Outside, the sun began its long descent. Shadows lengthened. The air cooled, but the day was not waning. It was deepening. The afternoon unfolded, not like a new page, but like an old one, turned again with care. In the monastery, time did not race toward sunset. It bowed before it. Each hour was a sacred threshold, and the hours after midday held a hush all their own, like the pause in a chant when breath gathers. Just before the next note begins, Brother Thomas stepped out from the scriptorium. His fingers stained faintly with ink, his eyes adjusted to shadows. The stone beneath his feet had warmed from the sun, and in its radiant stillness, it seemed to hold stories of sandals long vanished, of prayers whispered into walls, of feet that walked not in search of answers, but in quiet company with the questions. He paused beneath the cloister arch, looking out at the courtyard. A breeze stirred the ivy. Doves cooed from the roof's edge, and he thought, perhaps the soul bends toward peace the way a vine bends toward light, slowly, silently, inevitably. Elsewhere, in the quiet room of infirmity, Brother Anselm sat beside the oldest monk, Brother Ilarion, whose eyes remained closed but whose breath came steady. A soft wool blanket covered his lap. His hands, pale and parchment thin, rested like folded wings. Brother Anselm crushed petals gently in the mortar, mixing them with oil warmed by the sun. The scent of marigold rose, golden and clean. He dipped linen into the salve and pressed it to the old monk's wrists, not as treatment, but as tenderness. No words were spoken. None were needed. In silence, healing does not rush. It listens. At the far wall of the cloister, Brother Aldrich sat alone, carving a small figure from olive wood. It would be a lamb, a gift for the orphanage beyond the hill. Each stroke of the blade was deliberate, humble. His fingers moved as if remembering a shape that already existed, hidden inside the grain. Is that not what we are? Not made, but revealed, carved gently by time, by love, by stillness. The sky above shifted to a deeper hue, not yet twilight, but leaning toward it. The sun began to arc lower, and with it, the monastery entered its most inward hour. Inside the chapel, Brother Nereus knelt near the icon of Saint Benedict. A single candle flickered at the base. He did not pray for change. He did not ask for more. He simply breathed, and in that breath found the space where surrender begins. From the nave, faint chanting began, not as part of liturgy, but as the murmur of one monk's soul meeting the invisible dot. It echoed lightly, dancing with the dust motes in golden beams, ut in omnibus glorificiter Deus, that in all things God may be glorified. A thought moved through the cloister like a shadow across water. What if holiness is not in doing, but in being and in seeing? The fountain in the center courtyard gurgled softly, its waters catching late sunlight, its sound echoing off ancient stone like a memory too gentle to leave. Brother Thomas returned to his cell and sat by the window. The wooden shutters cracked just enough to let the light in. He picked up a small psalter and ran his thumb along its edge, not to read, just to feel its presence. Some texts are meant to be read with the skin, some with the heart. The monastery had no clocks, no buzzers, no alarms. Time moved as the monks did, in silence, in circles, in softness. Even the animals sensed the shift. The bees flew slower, the sparrows perched longer. A cat, curled near the cloister wall, opened one eye, saw the light, and drifted back into stillness. In this hour, nothing hurried, nothing grasped. Even the light began to bow, and as it did, each monk, wherever he was, whatever his task, felt the same quiet nudge in the chest, that today had not been wasted, that peace was not a prize at the end of effort, but a presence waiting beneath every breath, every breath. The light was bending now, not breaking, but deepening. It turned the stone corridors amber and carved long shadows upon the flagstones, soft, elongated echoes of forms that once bustled but now bowed to evening. The sun, drifting westward, no longer dazzled, it whispered. The monastery stirred for Vespers. The bell tower, tall, lichen draped, and ancient, gave one long, slow toll. Not a command, but a beckoning. The sound moved like a breath through the cloisters, calling each monk not forward, but inward. Brother Thomas laid down his psalter and closed his eyes. That single tone still hovered in the air, as if time itself paused, waiting. In the garden, Brother Cillian stood from his kneeling work. His knees creaked, but his face was content. He had been pulling weeds, but it felt more like lifting burdens, not his own, but those left behind by unspoken sorrows. With dirt on his palms and sun on his cheeks, he bowed his head and turned toward the chapel. Even the wind seemed to know the hour. It softened, the birds quieted, and inside the stone belly of the church, light became gold. Then gold became hush. The monks entered one by one, cowled barefoot on worn stone. Their footsteps echoed gently, like the last few drops of rain in an empty basin. They took their places in the choir stalls, wooden and creaking, ancient and familiar. Candles were lit, a dozen small suns whose flames bent and flickered, as if leaning into the stillness. Brother Aldrich held the first note, his voice low, deliberate, not loud, but clear, as though it had waited all day to be spoken. That others followed, voices weaving, not over one another, but through one another. A chant formed, slow, solemn, smooth as breath. Deus in agitorium meum intend, O God, come to my assistance. The Latin unfurled like incense. It did not matter if the words were understood. Their shape was enough. Their cadence, a ladder. Each monk's voice was a rung, and together they climbed, not toward heaven exactly, but toward the sacred stillness that lives between moments, that holy hush behind the eyes. The light, now dimming fast, kissed the stained glass windows. Rubies, sapphires, and emeralds, colored fragments of saints and seraphs, glowed like memory. They were not pictures. They were thresholds. One pane caught Brother Nereus's eye, Saint Jerome with a lion at his feet. The beast's paw rested against the monk's sandal, eyes closed in quiet trust. Nereus stared for a moment longer than usual, that his peace tamed or revealed. Are we not all lions, once wounded, now watching? The chant continued. Call and response, voice and silence, inhale and exhale. And then the Magnificat. My soul doth magnify the Lord. The words rose like water lifted by moonlight, filling the air not with noise, but with meaning. Brother Thomas felt it not in his throat, but in his chest, as though the words pressed into his ribs, rearranging something deep inside. A kind of alchemy, sound transforming silence. Silence transmuting the self. Outside, the sun dipped beyond the hills. A final hush fell like a blanket. The last candle was snuffed. A curl of smoke wove upward and vanished, and the monks stood, bowed, and left as they had come. No applause, no urgency, just the scent of wax, and the memory of voices lingering in stone. The chapel emptied, but in its emptiness there was fullness, and in its silence something continued to sing, evening now, not fallen, but gently folded over the monastery like a soft woolen cloak. The sun had slipped behind the cypress-covered hills, and in its absence the world took on a gentler shape, not darker, but deeper. Within the thick stone walls the temperature cooled, but the air held a strange warmth, the kind that lingers after sacred speech, like breath still hovering in a room where the divine had passed by. The monks moved through the cloisters more slowly now, not from fatigue, but from reverence. The hours between Vespers and Compline were hours of deep interiority, of reflection without mirrors, of journeys without movement. Brother Tomas returned to the scriptorium, not to write, but to sit. A single beeswax candle flickered before him, its flame bowing in rhythm with an invisible wind. He placed a hand upon the table, feeling the grain of the wood. He had copied hundreds of psalms upon this surface. He had spilled ink, wept quietly, traced letters so slowly they felt like prayers, and now he simply sat. There is a wisdom that comes only in stillness, not the stillness of stopped time, but of deepened time, time made wide and tender. Outside his window, the bellflower vines swayed, catching the last sighs of day. What do we become when we are no longer trying to become anything at all? Brother Cillian, seated beneath the apple tree near the herb garden, sharpened his scythe with slow, circular strokes. Not because there was grass to cut, not tonight, but because the act itself was holy. Each stone-to-steel motion was deliberate, hypnotic. The tool that once tore now hummed in stillness. And perhaps that is true of the soul as well, that what once fought and struggled can learn to serve through gentleness. He paused and looked up at the sky. Blue had turned to violet. One by one, stars began to appear, not in haste, but in procession, as though the heavens, too, were monks, each taking their place in the liturgy of night. Inside, Brother Aldrich lit the oil lamps lining the eastern corridor, one flame at a time. The glass chimneys glowed gold, reflections dancing in their curves. His face, once hard with the discipline of his former soldier's life, had softened here. The light kissed the edges of his cowl, and in its flicker He seemed a statue carved by centuries of silence. Brother Anselm passed by, carrying a small vial of lavender oil. He would anoint Brother Ilarion again before bed, not because it would change anything, but because love, when given without reason, becomes sacred. He paused outside the old monk's cell, listening. Inside there was no sound but the rhythm of breath, slow, steady, like waves that had long since forgotten storm. A question hovered in Anselm's mind. Do we prepare the soul for death, or does death prepare the soul for silence? In the refectory, the table had been cleared. A single crust of bread remained. Beside the hearth, an offering for no one in particular, or perhaps for God in disguise. The fire had been banked, its glow soft and orange. Shadows climbed the walls now, not menacing, but contemplative, like monks of another realm, drawn in by the peace. And at last, the cloister fell into its gentlest breath. The hour before Colinplea, Line. Where nothing is done, but everything is felt in the cells. Robes were folded, psalters closed. A few murmured prayers traced the cool stone like water along old roots. Brother Nereus stood in the cloister garden, hands behind his back, gazing up at the first full view of night. Above him, the stars burned quietly, like thoughts too deep for words. The moon had not yet risen, but her light was coming, and with it, a deeper knowing, a knowing without answers, a peace without proof, a gold knot of this world. Night had arrived, not as an end, but as a soft unfolding. It did not crash upon the monastery like a tide. It seeped in like breath, like a prayer whispered backward into eternity. The bell tolled again, a lower tone, slower than vespers, deeper than matins. It called not the body, but the soul. It was the sound of surrender, of all that remained unspoken, returning to the divine in quiet offering. The monks gathered, shadows upon shadows, flowing silently through the cloisters, arched walkways. The stone beneath their bare feet held the last of the day's warmth, like a memory gently fading from the palm. They entered the chapel, one by one, no order, no hurry. Brother Thomas walked with his hands folded at his belly. His thoughts were not thoughts, exactly. More like flickers of feeling, carried on the scent of beeswax and incense. Compline was not for declarations, it was for release. No. Candles were lit this time but one, the great vigil flame near the altar, dancing, slow and tall within its glass. Its golden shimmer painted soft waves across the monks' robes as they knelt, bowed and waited for the hush to settle, and settle it did, like snowfall upon sleeping earth. Then, from Brother Aldrich's lips, the ancient invocation rose, Convert nos, Deus, salutaris, noster, turn us again, O God of our salvation. The response followed, layered like fog upon a lake, et avert Iram, tuhum, a nobis, and turn away your wrath from us. But it was not fear that moved them. It was longing, a longing to be simple, again to be still, like the stones, like the olive trees outside that needed no words to praise. The psalms flowed gently, not chanted with force, but carried on breath. Each syllable slowed the heart. Each pause deepened the silence. And in the stillness between verses, one could almost hear the world listening. Brother Cillian, in the third row, let his mind slip backward, not to memory, but to something older, to the day he first arrived at the monastery, soaked in rain, hollow with grief, carrying nothing but questions and a hunger for quiet. Now, years later, he still had no answers. but he no longer needed them. Perhaps the seeking itself was sacred. Perhaps the gold we thought we lacked was the silence we'd avoided all along. The monks stood in unison, the soft shuffle of robes echoing like leaves in windless trees. They recited the hymn of night, gentle tones rising like breath from sleeping mountains. Te lucis, ante terminum, to thee, O Christ, before the close of day. The melody shimmered, low and steady, like candlelight seen through a tear, and when the final note faded, the silence that followed was not empty, it was whole. Brother Nereus stepped forward, bowed low before the altar, and sang the blessing of night. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from awe. Visitor, quesimus, Domini, habitationem, istam. Visit this dwelling, O Lord, we pray. The Latin fell like rain upon thirsting ground. May thy holy angels dwell herein to keep us in peace. And then the monks bowed together, not as men, but as vessels emptied, ready for sleep, for surrender. As they filed out, the great wooden door closed behind them with a soft groan, not a shutting out of the world, but a sealing in of the sacred dot. Brother Thomas lingered a moment near the back, head bowed toward the flickering vigil flame. Its light kissed his cheeks, and he whispered, not aloud, but into the vastness within, "Let me vanish, so that only the light remains." He turned and walked the corridor back to his cell, candle in hand. The air was cold now, the silence absolute. Only the wind moved through the arches, and even that felt like prayer. Far above, the stars wheeled slowly. The world slept, and so did the monks, not out of weariness, but because they had finally remembered how to let go. The world had vanished now, not entirely, not in body, but in the way a flame withdraws into the wick just before sleep. The monastery lay in full hush, its breath barely rising. Stone walls held the coolness of night, and corridors that once echoed with footfalls now cradled only silence. A silence so deep it seemed to listen. To what? Perhaps to God, or perhaps to the soul, curled small in its cloistered bed, whispering things too delicate for daylight. Brother Tomos lay in his cell, a single wool blanket wrapped around him, hands folded upon his chest. The candle beside him had been snuffed, the smoke still curling toward the ceiling like a question without urgency. Outside his narrow window, the stars were radiant, not loud, not grand, just endlessly patient, the kind of light that does not announce itself, but waits to be noticed in the hour just before midnight. The monastery existed between worlds, between waking and sleep, between flesh and spirit, between what has passed and what still yearns to be born. A breeze moved through the garden outside, soft enough to stir only the rosemary. The night creatures did not sing. Even the owls seemed to keep vigil, as though honoring some ancient hush long forgotten by the world beyond these stone walls. Brother Aldrich, old and worn, yet ever watchful, had not yet lain down. He sat by the fire in the warming room, a thin shawl across his shoulders, his eyes half closed. He was not thinking, he was remembering, not events, but feelings. The scent of springtime incense, the feel of warm bread, the weight of his sword from a lifetime ago now long surrendered. He no longer asked why he had come here. That question had dissolved long ago, melted into the rhythm of bells and bread and silence. From the hallway, a soft knock. Brother Anselm stepped in, carrying a small satchel of dried lavender. He placed it on the shelf and paused, looking at Aldrich's face, lit by the last embers of firelight. "Sleep will come," Anselm whispered. Aldrich did not nod, but his eyes softened. and then a moment between them. Not conversation, not prayer, just presence. A sacred stillness only possible in places where nothing needs to be said. Elsewhere, Brother Nereus stirred in his bed. He had dreamed, or perhaps remembered, a long-forgotten hillside, a swing tied to an olive tree, and the smell of his mother's bread. A lifetime ago, he placed a hand on his chest and whispered, not to the room, not to God, but to something far older, let me be good soil, let me be good soil, let me receive the seed. Outside his window, the moon had begun to rise. She was full now, ancient, silver, indifferent, watching over monks and mountains alike. Her light spilled over the abbey roofs, cloaking them in a glow that had no source and no explanation. In this hour, the heart sees differently. Wounds are no longer sharp, desires no longer loud, even regret feels softened, like linen left long in sunlight. Is it not strange how the darkest hours cradle the gentlest truths? The monastery had no guards, no locks on its doors. Only silence, only trust. And within that trust, a kind of sacred cadence, where every man, regardless of age or history, became again a boy before God, not pleading, just being a sigh, a breath, a pulse, barely heard, and the monastery continued its great inward turning. That's the moonlight touched the cloisters and the garden. It turned the basil leaves silver, the dewdrops into mirrors, the silence into song. But no one heard, or perhaps everyone did, just not with ears. For in the monastery, at midnight, everything listens and everything dreams. And so the night deepened, not with fear, nor even with darkness, but with depth, a soft descent into that inner cavern, where the soul curls close to the mystery of itself. The monastery lay as if carved into silence, its halls no longer stone, but breath, a single inhalation held for centuries. Brother Thomas did not sleep. His eyes remained closed, but his spirit floated, somewhere between memory and metaphor. It was not a dream, it was something quieter. He saw himself walking, though not with feet, through corridors he'd never entered, beneath arches older than the abbey, under stars no chart had ever named, and around him, voices, not speaking, not whispering, but existing, the way wind lives in trees or light in water. One voice, older than language, asked, "What is silence but truth without sound?" He turned, no one, and yet everything. A library appeared, not of parchment or ink, but of breath and experience. Shelves made of moments, scrolls written in soul. He reached for a book bound in rough wool, its title nothing but a single golden thread. As he opened it, he found himself, but not the self of his thoughts, not the monk in robes, not the boy who arrived weeping, not the penitent kneeling in shadow. This self was made of intention, of stillness, of longing shaped into form. He wept, though his body never stirred. Can one grieve the parts of oneself that never had names? Is that not, too, a kind of liturgy? Elsewhere, Brother Nereus also stirred. He had not meant to wake, but in monasteries, there are hours when even sleep bows to the holy. He rose without lamp or candle, letting his hands guide him down the stone corridor. The walls, cool and whispering, felt like old friends. Every crack in the stone knew his touch. He moved like a ghost, not in fright, but in reverence, for the night had become a temple without walls. He stepped into the cloister garden barefoot. The grass was damp, and moonlight turned it pale as milk. Above, The stars did not twinkle. They watched. He sat beneath the fig tree. He did not know why. But he had long ago stopped questioning such things. The tree's branches swayed slightly, though no wind moved. And then, in the hush, the air whispered, "Is not growth always silent?" He breathed in deeply, not for air, but for meaning. A falling fig landed softly beside him, ripe, sweet-smelling, untouched. He picked it up, held it in his palm, a fruit, a gift, a symbol of what? Perhaps time, perhaps patience, perhaps the soul, ripening unseen. He smiled, not because he understood, but because he no longer needed to. In his cell, Brother Aldrich stirred. He too was dreaming of a battlefield long gone, of a sword laid down, of blood turned to ink. In the dream, a voice said, "What is strength, if not gentleness, stretched across time?" And when he awoke, heart still beating like a distant drum, he turned to the wall and kissed the stone. No reason, only gratitude. Outside, the night pressed on, gentle, endless, wide as grace, and the monastery slept, not from exhaustion, but from knowing, before the sky admits its first whisper of light. There is a breathless pause, a moment so fragile, so perfectly poised, that even the stars seem reluctant to leave it. This was that moment. The monastery, still cloaked in sleep, held its breath like a bowl cradling still water. Every stone, every timber beam, every pane of hand-blown glass waited. For what? Perhaps not for the sun, but for the return of awareness. The silent knowing that the world turns, not just in time, but in soul. Brother Thomas opened his eyes, not from rest, not from dream, but from invitation. Something had stirred within, something ancient and soft. He sat upright in the darkness, letting the cool air wash over his skin. The silence was deep, but not empty. It hummed, faintly, like a memory long buried beneath thought. He reached for the basin beside his cot, dipped his fingers in the chilled water, and touched his forehead, lips, and chest. It was not ritual. It was remembering. Remembering what it means to be clay, shaped by something unseen. Outside, in the cloister walk, a solitary candle flickered. Brother Nereus had lit it, not to see, but to witness. He stood beneath the open sky, wrapped in wool, barefoot against the stone. The candle's small flame pushed gently against the night, not in defiance, but in offering. A moth drifted through the golden light, its wings whispering secrets to the flame. It did not burn. It only circled, as if dancing with what it could never hold, and Nereus watched, breathing in the scent of wax and time. How many things in life do we chase, not to possess, but simply to stay close to their warmth? He placed the candle at the base of the fountain and turned toward the eastern wall, that ancient barrier through which, each morning, the sun returned like a promise. He waited. He was not alone. From every cell, slow movement. The monks stirred, one by one, not roused by bells, but by the rhythm within, the same rhythm that guided seeds to sprout, tides to rise, hearts to beat. Brother Aldrich moved with the dignity of age. His knees ached, but his spirit walked ahead of his body, guiding him like a lantern before his feet. He passed the old cloister, oak, and pressed his palm to its bark, rough and gnarled like the lines across his brow. He whispered to it, "You've watched longer than I have. Tell me, does the light always come?" And the tree, though silent, replied, in the stillness, in the scent of earth, in the quiet creak of boughs waiting for wind. A bell finally rang, the first chime of Lauds, the morning prayer. Its tone, soft but sure, rippled outward like the first breath of a newborn child. The monks gathered, robed and silent, feet brushing the flagstones as if afraid to wake the very ground. In the chapel, light had not yet come, only the vigil flame remained, a sentinel of the night. They bowed, not to doctrine, but to presence. They began to chant, low, slow, as if drawing the sun from its slumber. Domini, labia mea aperis. O Lord, open thou my lips, etos mea ununtiabit, laudim tuum, and my mouth shall proclaim thy praise. And outside, as if in answer, the horizon softened. The sky, once ink, now a bruised lavender. Then the faintest line of gold. Not light yet, but its whisper. Brother Thomas closed his eyes as he sang, and saw within him a field wide open, waiting, and the sun rose there too, because sometimes the real dawn begins within, and then, as the final note of chant dissolved into breath, light entered, not as conquest, not as command, but like a veil, being lifted, slowly, gently, as though the heavens themselves remembered how to sigh. Through the narrow chapel windows, golden strands unravelled, soft as wool, bright as memory, quiet as a thought that has waited its whole life to be spoken. The monks remained still, not frozen, but yielded, like trees to rain, like parchment to ink. The sun did not rush, it crept, curious, reverent, across the stone floor, illuminating specks of dust that rose and swirled like ancient spirits dancing in the hush. Brother Aldrich watched the light touch the altar. Marble warmed to gold, wood revealed its grain, and the old crucifix above flickered, no longer a symbol of pain, but of transformation. Is all suffering a seed? Is the cross not just a burden, but a becoming? He bowed his head, not in guilt, but in awe, for every morning was a resurrection, not of body, but of possibility. Brother Thomas felt it too. As the chant faded, he opened his eyes. The chapel was the same, and yet entirely new. The shadows had retreated, and in their place, light had written a new scripture across the walls. The world outside began to stir. A sparrow landed on the sill, ruffled its feathers, and chirped as if to say, "It begins again." And it did, but with footfalls in the corridor, with the clinking of bowls in the kitchen, with the turning of soil in the garden. But here, in the chapel, the monks lingered, not out of duty, but longing, because to rise from stillness is to tear oneself from the mystery, and sometimes even the soul wishes to remain nestled in the cocoon of holy quiet. Brother Nereus was the last to rise. He remained kneeling, palms upturned, as if offering nothing and everything. He did not pray with words, for some truths are beyond syllables. He simply listened to the hum of light, the breath of stone, the echo of his own heartbeat, which felt, in that moment, older than time. When he finally stood, he did so slowly, as if returning from far away. He stepped into the cloister walk, and the morning hit him like grace. Sunlight drenched the stone. Pathway.ivy shimmered. Even the shadows seemed golden. He walked barefoot toward the garden. Brother Clement was already there, bent over a patch of leeks, humming an old Breton hymns. The scent of earth was thick, loamy, sacred. Worms wove through the soil like scribes, inscribing creation with silence. Clement looked up and smiled. Not a word passed between them, but in that glance all was understood. The work of the day had begun, not with toil, but with reverence, for in a monastery Labour is not labour, it is liturgy with one's hands. And as Brother Nereus took a spade and began to dig, he whispered, "Let me turn the earth as you turn the soul, slow, deep, and without fear." Somewhere above, a bell rang, not loudly, just enough. Another hour marked, another chance to begin again. The day had broken, but not like glass, like bread, like bread. The sun had fully risen now, but not as something above. It seemed to live within the monastery walls, caught in window glass, woven into robes, resting on the curve of a wooden ladle in the kitchen. Light was not a thing outside to be seen, but a thing within, quietly known. In the herb garden, Brother Thomas moved among the thyme and sage, a wicker basket slung across one hip, its rim already lined with dewy mint and chamomile. His hands did not rush. Each leaf was a life, each pluck a prayer. The monastery did not teach them to escape the world, but to touch it differently, and so they did, in dirt-stained fingernails, in bread dough beneath palms, in stitched robes, in the careful placement of stones around the lavender beds. A silence hummed beneath it all. Not empty. Not a lack, but a fullness, a living hush. Like the space between heartbeats, like the pause between two verses in a hymn. Brother Aldrich stood at the edge of the orchard, pruning the old apple tree with tender hands. The tree had stood longer than many of them, a crooked sentinel, its bark like folded parchment. He whispered to it, not because he thought it could hear, but because something in him needed to say, "We are both being trimmed, that we may bear sweeter fruit." And isn't that the truth of it? That the cutting away is not cruelty, but care, that even in loss there is shaping. From the cloister, a faint breeze wandered through the open arches, carrying the scent of rosemary and sun-warmed stone. The air was laced with distant chant, just a thread of melody, barely there, as if the building itself was humming its own name. In the scriptorium, Brother Nereus bent over vellum, quill in hand, eyes soft. He was not copying sacred texts today. He was repairing the edge of a torn page, the margin of a psalter worn from use. His fingertips brushed the parchment, as one might touch the cheek of a sleeping child. Every fibre of the work demanded presence. A wrong breath could smudge, a moment of haste could tear, and so he let go of time and entered something else, something slower, deeper. He breathed in the scent of ink and patience. The scratch of the quill was not sound, it was rhythm. The light pooling on the page, a gentle blessing. How many lives had touched this scroll? How many unseen hands kept wisdom from being lost? He paused, quill raised mid-air, and let a question drift in. Is not all sacredness simply attention, given fully? He wrote again, not to preserve knowledge, but to cradle it, and outside. The bell for terce, the third hour, began to ring. 3 tones, each one lingering longer than expected. Brother Thomas looked up from the garden, shading his eyes. A single cloud passed across the sun, like a thought interrupting prayer. And yet, the light remained. It always did. For light, like truth, does not vanish. It waits, it waits, it waits, in seeds, in silence, in longing, in the curve of a monk's back, in the whisper of wind through chapel stones. And so the monks turned toward the chapel once more, not to escape the world, but to re-enter it more gently. As they walked, robes brushing stone, Brother Aldrich whispered, "The world is not a thing we leave behind. It is a thing we sanctify." And above them, high in the beams of the chapel's vaulted roof, A dove settled, silent, still, watching as if it too had something to pray for. Afternoon settled not like a stranger, but like a quiet companion returning, bearing the weight of sun and the hush of reflection. Its light no longer danced, it lingered, it rested upon lintels, warmed the stones where monks sat in meditation, and wrapped the cloister in a golden stillness. In the garden, Brother Thomas paused beneath the olive tree, its twisted limbs casting shadows like ancient script across the ground. He leaned against its bark, not for support, but for communion. The olives had yet to ripen, but already their bitter promise pulsed through the air. He closed his eyes and listened, not to birds, not to footsteps, but to the quiet unfolding of his own breath. Each inhale a petition, each exhale a surrender. Farther down the cloister walk, Brother Nereus sat with a broken clay pot in his lap. He turned it in his hands, fingers tracing cracks, eyes following the fault lines like a cartographer of sorrow. He did not rush to mend it. Instead, he studied its fracture as one might study a sacred wound. Why do we fear the broken? Is it not in the cracks that the light finds its way in? Was the pot not more beautiful now, because it had known shattering, and would still be whole again? With delicate reverence, he took up a brush, dipped it in gold resin, and began the slow work of kintsugi, the art of healing visible. He filled the scars with gold, not to hide them, but to honor them. Across the corridor, Brother Aldrich rested. In the library, the scrolls were bathed in amber light. Dust hung in shafts, like suspended time. He did not read. He simply sat, surrounded by the voices of centuries. Each parchment a whisper, each shelf a psalm. His eyes were closed, but his soul wandered among lines of ink and candle shadows, pausing at every mystery that had no answer, only echo. Outside, in the courtyard, Brother Clement passed between rows of lavender, cutting stalks with gentle hands. He tied the bundles, loosely laid them in woven baskets, and smiled as bees returned again and again, drawn not by command, but invitation. And is that not the heart of monastic life? Not the denial of the world, but the slow, deliberate embrace of it, to live without haste, to see deeply, to let even labor become a lullaby. The bell for none, the 9th hour, rang out. Its chime did not break the silence, it joined it. The monks moved toward the chapel, once more, steps unhurried, breath in rhythm with stone. Within the chapel walls, sunlight had dimmed to gold dust. Shadows lengthened like memories, but there was no fear in the coming dark, only peace. Brother Thomas kneeled near the altar, a single sprig of rosemary tucked into his sleeve. It sent a reminder that even in stillness, life grows. They began to chant again. Their voices, weary from the day, carried a different texture, now not clarity, but depth. Like river water turned slow and dark at dusk. Each note lingered, each breath a pause, carved into eternity. And as their voices echoed into silence, Brother Aldrich thought, perhaps the day does not grow old, perhaps it grows wise. He touched his chest, where the rhythm still beat steadier now, and he whispered into the gathering hush, we are not here to escape time, but to become time itself. And somewhere in the beams above, the dove stirred again, a single feather drifting downward like a benediction, and then evening, not sudden, not swift, but like a hand turning a page, slowly, carefully revealing not an end, but a deepening. The monastery dimmed not in sorrow, but in softness. Shadows no longer stretched, they folded, gathering themselves into corners, like monks returning to their cells. The bell did not ring this hour, it breathed, low, rounded, as if the stone itself had begun to hum. Brother Nereus stood alone beneath the cloister arches. Above him, the last light flickered through the lattice of vines. He held nothing, did nothing, only stood, a man-shaped stillness, within a temple of quiet. His thoughts were not burdens, but petals drifting across the smooth surface of awareness. He remembered the broken pot, now mended with gold. He remembered the chant that rose at none. He remembered his mother's voice, long ago, saying, "Silence is not the absence of words. It is the presence of everything else." A single candle flickered in the chapel's far wall. It had not been lit by him. Perhaps no one had lit it. Perhaps it had always been burning, like the soul's longing to return. Brother Aldrich passed by with a lantern in hand. He offered a nod. Nothing more. The lantern's glow cast soft light on the stone. It danced, but gently, as if mindful not to disturb the peace that had gathered there. Within the refectory, Brother Thomas arranged wooden bowls, simple lentil stew, a crust of bread, a bit of honey. No feast, but a sacrament. Nonetheless, they ate with their hands, with reverence. The clinking of spoons was the only sound, a symphony of the sacred ordinary. Brother Clement offered a reading from the Psalms. His voice, hoarse from the day, trembled slightly. He makes me lie down in green pastures, and for a moment, the cloister became a meadow. The bowls became stones beside still waters, and the flicker of oil lamps became stars, peeking through the veil of dusk. After the meal, they returned their bowls in silence, not as chore as devotion. Even in the smallest motions there was worship. The sun, by now, had vanished behind the forested hills beyond the outer wall. The sky turned indigo. The air held the scent of lavender and ash. Brother Nereus walked the garden path once more, barefoot, his soles remembering the earth. He paused by the olive tree again. The same tree, the same silence, but he was not the same. He placed his hand against its bark and asked, wordlessly, "Is it in stillness that the soul becomes visible?" The stars did not answer, but they shimmered, one by one. Lanterns were lit across the cloister. No one directed it, no one directed it, no one called the hour. They simply knew, as birds know when to migrate, as the tide knows when to return. The chapel welcomed them once more. No chant this time, only presence. Each monk knelt, or stood, or simply breathed, and in that sacred hush, Brother Thomas looked up at the arched ceiling, and imagined it was not stone, but sky. And in that sky, a question unfolded like a scroll. What if the monastery was never built with walls? What if the cloister is the soul itself? And what if prayer is simply the act of remembering? Brother Aldrich snuffed out the final flame. Darkness did not descend, it embraced, and in that warm, deep shadow, the world did not sleep. It listened to the breath of monks, to the hush of stars, to the ancient rhythm of lives aligned with eternity. And, as the wind stirred the chapel stones one last time, Brother Nereus smiled, eyes closed, and whispered, Perhaps the monastery was never a place. Perhaps it was always a way of seeing." Night had now fully drawn her veil, not in haste, but like a mother tucking a child beneath soft blankets, whispering lullabies older than language. The monastery did not resist the dark. It welcomed it, as a womb welcomes stillness, as ink welcomes the feathered quill. Stone by stone, The building seemed to exhale. Even the air changed, cooler, wiser. The wind moved like breath through the cloister, touching arches, kissing the tips of candles, now gently extinguished, and carrying with it the scent of old timber and rose petals, pressed between psalms. Brother Nereus lay on his straw-filled mattress, a thin blanket drawn to his chest, his eyes wide open. Sleep had not come yet, but he did not call for it. He listened instead to the silence, not the silence of emptiness, but the kind that holds things, like the hush in a cave before a revelation, or the pause in a hymn before its final note, a silence so full it began to feel like presence. From the cell beside him, a soft cough in another, the gentle shift of fabric. Elsewhere, the creak of beams speaking to the stars. Nothing loud, but everything, alive and above it all. The night itself, a vast cathedral made, not of marble but of mystery. Brother Aldrich sat in the chapel alone, long after the others had retired. One candle flickered before the icon of the Virgin. Her eyes, painted centuries ago, seemed to look not at him, but through him. He did not pray with words. Words had long since fallen away. He simply sat, a soul resting inside a soul, a question wrapped inside another, and in that stillness, he remembered the scroll he once read as a novice. When the world sleeps, the soul awakens. In the quiet of the night, God writes his secrets on the walls of the heart. A breeze stirred the candle flame. The Virgin's painted face shimmered for a moment, as if smiling. In another cell, Brother Thomas dreamed, but not as others do. His dreams were not made of stories, but of feelings. A field of tall wheat, rippling with unseen music. A river made of honey and stars. The sound of chanting that seemed to come from within his own bones. And a door, always a door, half open. He would not walk through it, not yet, but he would reach for its framend, feel the warmth of something waiting. A voice, not heard, but known, whispered, "What if you are the door? What if all that you seek waits behind your own stillness?" And he smiled in his sleep, not because he understood, but because he no longer needed to. Above the monastery, the moon held vigil round and silent, as if watching the monks in return. Is not all true prayer a mutual gaze? The earth longing for heaven, and heaven longing back. The owl perched upon the chapel roof turned its head. Its eyes glowed, not with hunger, but with knowing. Below it, the monastery breathed like a great sleeping beast, its heart, the chapel, its lungs, the cloisters, its dreams, unwritten scripture. And as Brother Nereus finally closed his eyes, and the last candle bowed to darkness, a thought floated gently into the cradle of his mind. Perhaps the soul is not a flame to be lit, but a night to be walked. And perhaps the dark is not what we fear. Perhaps it is what we're meant to understand. And so the monastery slept, but nothing was still. Everything was watching. Everything was becoming. Midnight did not arrive with fanfare. It was already there, waiting, like an old monk who speaks only when spoken to, in the heart of the monastery. All was quiet, but never empty. Silence held shape. It had corners. It had memory. Brother Aldrich sat upright in his cell, his body still, his mind awake, not from unrest, but from a stillness so deep it rippled outward, like the quiet drop of a pebble in sacred water. He did not move. He listened, the kind of listening that no longer waits for sound. And in that hush, something ancient stirred, not a voice, but a presence, not a vision, but a knowing. What is the self, he wondered, but a bell that rings only when struck by silence? The candle beside his bed had long since burned out, leaving only the faint scent of beeswax and smoke. But in the absence of flame, the soul began to glow. He remembered a scroll he once copied, its Latin words etched like veins across vellum: in tenebris, lux nascita, in darkness, light is born. And was that not the shape of every true awakening, to first pass through the veil, not of light, but of unknowing? Outside, moonlight spilled like milk across the flagstones. The cloister's walkways shimmered in silver, each pillar casting a twin in shadow, an architecture of opposites, light and dark, sound and stillness, knowing and wonder. Brother Tomas, still deep in his dreams, found himself again at the door, the same door, always half open, always humming, but tonight it pulsed. He stepped through what he found was not heaven, not a vision of saints or thrones or golden books. He found a garden, wild, unkempt, ancient. The vines curled in spirals that whispered secrets. The trees bore fruit shaped like questions, and from beneath the roots laughter bubbled low and warm. A figure stood there, neither monk nor man, neither future nor past, cloaked in midnight, face made of stars. It said nothing, only raised one hand and placed it gently upon Brother Tomas's chest, and there, in the dreaming of the monk, light bloomed, not around him, within, as if something buried had been waiting centuries to be seen. Is it not strange, the dream whispered without lips, how we search the heavens for what has always been buried inside? Tomas wept in his sleep, not from sorrow, from recognition. From recognition, meanwhile, Brother Clement stirred in his cot. He had no visions, only the memory of his father's voice, gentle, kind, long dead, saying, "Be where your feet are, my son, that is enough." And somehow, even this was revelation. Outside, the owl stretched its wings and took flight across the garden. Its wings did not flap, they flowed below it. The moonlight traced patterns in the soil, like forgotten alphabets left by angels too shy to speak. And inside the chapel, though no monk sat awake, a draught moved through the nave, caressing the altar, ruffling the pages of an open psalter, the page that fluttered red. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But below it, in the margin, long ago, a trembling novice had penned, and perhaps love is the end. And still the night deepened, still the silence spoke, still the soul walked, not in search of anything new, but in remembrance of something old, older than the monastery, older than the chant, older than language. That the self is not something to be improved, but something to be remembered. That peace does not arrive, it awakens. And as Brother Aldrich drifted into the sacred weight of sleep, he heard, not with ears, but with essence, "You are not the seeker, you are the sanctuary." The monastery was not asleep, though eyes were closed, and bodies lay still beneath woolen blankets. Something deeper, something ancient, remained awake. The night had reached its farthest edge, the quietest breath before the inhale of dawn. And in that hush, all things listened. The stones, having cradled centuries of prayer, whispered to one another in the language of memory. The wood beams above the chapel, weathered and wise, exhaled gentle creaks as if sighing in recollection. There was no movement, yet the whole world within these walls was becoming. Brother Tomas still lay in his bed, but the garden of his dream had not vanished. He now stood within it, barefoot, the soil warm, the air scented with myrrh and apple blossom. The stars above this dream sky were not distant, they hovered close, like old friends watching from behind a veil. And the door that had once stood half open, was gone. For he now realized there had never been a door, only the idea of one. And with that knowing, a new feeling arrived. Stillness, not as silence, but as unity. He was no longer walking through a dream. The dream walked through him. A voice, softer than thought, rose from the root of his being. You seek to awaken, but what if your soul never slept? What if the true pilgrimage is not to God, but back to yourself? Elsewhere, Brother Aldrich stirred in his sleep, his face lit faintly by the approaching hint of morning, not the sun itself, but the soft grey light that preludes it, like the turning of a sacred page. He dreamt not in visions, but in a single sensation, weightlessness, as if the years he carried of discipline, of duty, of doubt, had been peeled away one by one new till all that remained was breath. He floated, not upward, but inward, and in that drifting he felt himself as the forest, as the chapel stone, as the ink on the page, as the candle's flame before it flickers. He became, and unbecoming, he was. Brother Clement, though dreamless, lay with a smile traced faintly on his lips. His body, once racked by the aches of aging limbs, lay soft, cradled by straw, as though the monastery itself had gathered him close, and far above, the stars began their slow retreat. Not in haste, but in reverence, they made way for dawn. Like monks yielding to the abbot's passing in the chapel, the air thickened, not with heat, but with presence, as if some ancient eye had opened in the centre of the silence. The candle that had been extinguished now bore a single thread of smoke, and in that smoke light began to gather. The east-facing window, etched in coloured glass, caught the first pale streak of day, not golden, not red, but blue, soft, sacred blue, the colour of waiting, the colour of waiting, the colour of breath held in devotion, and within that tender birth of light, Brother Nereus awoke. He did not startle, he did not stretch, he simply opened his eyes and wept, not from sorrow, but because, for a moment, he remembered something no language could hold, something the stars had tried to teach him, something the earth had hummed beneath his feet, something the chant had echoed in the hollows of his chest, that he was not apart, he had never been apart. Can a flame forget the fire from which it comes? Can the soul forget the sky it was shaped by? He rose slowly, stepping to the small wooden window of his cell, and looked out. The cloister arches were soaked in the first breath of blue. The garden below shimmered with dew, each blade of grass a tiny mirror of heaven, and as the first bell of Lord's began to ring soft, deliberate, eternal, he whispered, "Maybe this is it. Maybe this is the light we were always waiting for. The bell rang once more. Its chime did not pierce the dawn, it cradled it, a sound round and warm, like the earth itself had exhaled, and slowly, from their narrow cells, the monks began to rise, not in haste, not as one driven by obligation, but as flowers lifting toward light, each gesture sacred, each breath deliberate. The monastery was waking, yet it was not so much waking Upus. It was remembering itself. Brother Aldrich pressed his feet to the cold stone floor. He did not shiver. The chill grounded him, reminded him that he belonged to earth as much as to sky. He traced the sign of the cross over his chest with fingers still softened by sleep. not as ritual as reunion on another cell. Brother Thomas folded his blanket, the dream still humming in his blood. He carried no words from it, no image to describe, only a feeling, as though the stars had left behind a warmth inside his chest. He whispered no prayer. He was the prayer. Outside, the cloisters were painted in morning blue. The arches cast long shadows, the light streaming between them like ancient scripture written not with ink, but with radiance. Birdsong drifted in from beyond the walls, simple, unconcerned, perfect. The garden, still damp with dew, smelled of lavender and loam. Tiny leaves shook gently in the breeze, as if they, too, had heard the bell's call. And the chapel. Oh, the chapel. It glowed, not from candles, not yet, but from the soft welcome of dawn seeping through stained glass and bathing the stone altar in color. Reds, like memory. Golds, like breath. Blues, like eternity. Unfolding Brother Clement stepped inside. He was the first. He walked slowly down the center aisle, his steps echoing with soft reverence. His fingers brushed the back of a wooden pew worn smooth by generations of longing. And for a moment, he felt time collapse, as if the prayers of those long passed still, whispered in the walls, like echoes folded into the mortar. He bowed before the altar, not to worship something above him, but to acknowledge the presence within him. One by one, the other monks entered. Their robes whispered like wind through trees. No one spoke, none needed to. Each carried a piece of silence, like a lantern from the night. And as they gathered in the choir stalls, a breath passed through them all, united, unseen. Then the first note. A single voice, low, soft, like the earth's own murmur. Domini, labia mea, aperis. O Lord, open my lips. And from that opening, the chant flowed. No harmony, no performance, only presence, like a river returning to its source. The voices met and mingled, not as many, but as one, rising, falling, folding inward. The monastery breathed through them, and as the psalm flowed over stone, as syllables born centuries before danced once more into morning air, a question stirred softly in Brother Aldrich's heart. What if these words are not meant to reach God, but to awaken Him within us? What if the chant was not a calling out, but a calling back, a thread unspooled from the Salto? Tether it again to the divine it had always held. Outside, the sun breached the hills, not suddenly, but like a sacred unveiling. A golden line on the edge of the world. Inside, the monks sang to change the world, not to escape it, but to enter it more deeply. And the chant rose higher, and the light grew brighter. And in that moment, nothing was missing. The soul was here, the light was here. The monastery, not just a place of stone and order, but a vessel of timeless becoming. If this is prayer, Brother Thomas thought, then maybe prayer is not a reaching, but a remembering. And so they sang, and so they were. The sun had risen, but it did not rush. It crept gently across the stones of the cloister, each beam like a golden monk, silent and assured, laying warm fingers on cold floor sand, calling even the smallest shadows home. The singing of lauds had ended. The chant faded not into absence, but into resonance, echoes that curled around columns, settled in rafters, and found rest in the soul's quiet chambers. The monks dispersed like petals from a blooming center, not scattered, placed. Brother Aldrich lingered for a moment in the chapel's threshold, his eyes following the movement of a dust motias. It spun, slowly in a shaft of light, so delicate, so directionless, and yet held. The monastery's daily rhythm had begun, but here, time did not rush to devour itself. Time bowed. Time breathed. There were no clocks, only bells, no deadlines, only divine appointments. Prime would come soon, the second prayer of the day. But between Lords and Prime lay a sacred in-between, the golden hour of still labor. This was the hour for quiet tending, for sweeping the cloister walks, for mending sandals, for gathering herbs from the dukist garden. And so they moved, like whispers made flesh. Brother Clement walked with a basket, gathering mint and rosemary, his fingers careful not to bruise the leaves. He moved slowly, not from age, but from reverence, for even the act of harvesting was an act of gratitude. As he bent low to pick a sprig of lavender, a small spider spun silver threads between two stems. He paused, watching the spider. Unhurried, wove its circle, thread by thread, motion by motion, until the invisible became seen, and Brother Clement smiled. Is this not what we do? He thought. We build from silence, thread prayers into the air, spin meaning into the morning. Elsewhere, Brother Thomas was copying scripture by candlelight, his quill soaked in deep black ink. Each letter he formed was an act of meditation, not merely to replicate, but to honor. His hand moved steadily over the parchment, but his heart was what truly wrote, and above the page, he imagined the words ascending, like incense from the soul. In principior erat verbum, in the beginning was the word. He paused, but what if the word was not first? What if before word there was listening? He dipped the quill again, wrote slower. In the kitchen, Brother Nereus stirred a pot of barley and lentils, its aroma rising with the steam, earthy, humble, whole. The flames licked gently at the base of the clay pot, and he whispered small prayers as he cooked, not to bless the food, but to bless the act. Every task was devotion, even sweeping. Brother Matthew moved with broom in hand across the cloister floor, each bristle stroke a kind of chant, a rhythm in harmony with his breath. He did not glean for cleanliness alone, but for clarity. What gathers in corners, he mused, gathers in the soul. And as the sunlight reached higher across the stone, stretching into doorways, lighting corridors with golden arms, the monastery it all seemed to sigh with quiet joy. It was not just a place, it was a vessel of rhythm, of mystery, of remembrance. For here, the day was not past, it was received, like the Eucharist, like a whispered truth, like a cup held with both hands. And as the bell for prime rang out, soft and deep, calling them once more to prayer, each monk stopped where he was. Hands paused, heads bowed, hearts quieted, because every hour, every task, every breath was not just part of the day. It was the day, and maybe, just maybe, that was the gold the world had forgotten. That life was not something to conquer, it was something to keep company with. The bell for prime faded like a ripple upon a pond, softly swallowed by the hush that followed. Not silence, not absence, but presence, thick as velvet, finer than dust. The monks gathered once more within the stone womb of the chapel. Their sandals whispered against the floor, their robes trailing like echoes of older centuries. They moved not as men performing a routine, but as souls returning to the wellspring. And overhead, light continued its slow dance across the faces of saints, carved in oak and glass. Time within these walls did not pass. It circled, it deepened. They began again. voices meeting in the middle of the sacred space, not to ascend, but to descend, into meaning, into stillness, into the marrow of things. Deus in agitorium, meum intend. O God, come to my assistance. The chant curled like wood smoke beneath the vaulted ceiling, rose like breath on a winter's morning, and vanished only to remain. It was in the stones, in the blood, in the unspeakable place, beneath language, where understanding does not come from thought, but from being. And in that space, Brother Aldrich closed his eyes. He did not fall asleep. He fell inward, into the deep river beneath all rivers, where questions flowed without needing answers. What if God has no voice? What if his silence is the holiest sound? And what if we are not here to speak to him, but to finally hear him? A low note held steady by Brother Nereus trembled on the edge of stillness. It lingered, as if unwilling to leave, as if it too had become aware that something deeper was being revealed. Then the final breath of prime, and the monks bowed their heads, not to end, but to enter. For prayer was not a pause in life, it was the pulse beneath it. And when they stood again, they did not carry the chant with them. It had already taken root. Outside, the sun had risen higher, casting long shadows beneath the arches of the cloister walk, each shadow like an ink stroke, each beam of light like the page of a living manuscript. Brother Tomas stepped into that courtyard, his eyes lifted not in search of meaning, but in gratitude for the mystery in the center of the cloister garden. A fountain murmured gently. Water flowed over worn stone, round and round, like the passing of hours, like a soul remembering its shape. He sat on the wooden bench beside it, his fingers lightly brushing the edge of his psalter, but he did not open it. Instead, he listened to the water, to the wind brushing the lavender, to the hum of bees in the rosemary, and to something deeper, something within, a soundless music through the morning. Perhaps this, too, was liturgy. No words, only wonder. Elsewhere, Brother Clement was tending to the infirmary, its shelves lined with clay pots and tinctures, its air steeped in camphor and thyme. He crushed herbs with a mortar and pestle, the rhythm slow, the scent earthy, the motion eternal. And as he ground root into powder, he pondered, is healing not a form of worship? And is not every wound a doorway? Outside his window, a butterfly landed on a cracked windowsill. Its wings held the colors of dusk, though it was still morning. Fragile whole, a symbol, perhaps, or maybe, just a visitor. In the scriptorium, Brother Matthew copied a psalm with quiet devotion, his hand practiced, his mind still. But as he reached the final verse, he paused. He dipped the quill, and beneath the sacred Latin line, he traced something, small hidden a simple image of a vine. It twisted upward beside the margin, curling into a silent flourish, not for the eye of man, but for the joy of creation itself. He smiled. Even here, in rules and rubrics, there was room for the wild beauty of soul. Perhaps, he thought, that is where God truly dwells, not in the perfection of the chant, but in the curve of the unexpected leaf, not in the temple, but in the seed beneath the floor. And overhead, the bells rested, for there was no need to mark this hour. It marked itself. It had already become eternal. The sun had completed its arc, casting its last gold upon the cloister walls. The day, like a sacred scroll, was gently rolling closed. Evening had arrived, not with fanfare, but with a hush. A long exhaler from the lungs of the world. The bell for Compline rang slow and deep, each toll like the footfall of an angel walking backward into the dusk. The monks gathered once more beneath the vaulting stone, their shadows stretching like ink over ancient parchment. The chapel flickered with dozens of candles, tiny suns dancing atop melting wax, each flame a soul remembering its fire. Brother Aldrich bowed his head, not from weariness, from reverence, for the day was not ending. It was folding back into itself. May the Almighty grant us a peaceful night, came the chant, soft as breath on glass. And as the monks sang, their voices did not reach upward, they sank inward, into the folds of time, into the rhythm of the stars, into the secret place where all names become one. The air grew thick with quiet, even the stones seemed to listen. And in that sacred stillness, Brother Thomas saw it not with his eyes, but with his being, that the monastery was not just a place, it was a mirror. Every corridor walked, every bell heard, every herb gathered, every psalm whispered into stone, all of it pointed not to heaven above, but to the temple within. He remembered a question that had once stirred in the night. Is transformation not the real alchemy? And now he knew the answer. It was not found in gold, or vision, or even peace, but in presence, to live fully in the moment, to fold bread with care, to lift a single word like it mattered. That was the turning of lead into light. He opened his eyes. The last chant faded. Silence fell, but it was not empty. It was full. It was full. It was sacred. It was home. The monks returned to their cells. Each carried within thema stillness too deep for language. Brother Clement extinguished the candle by his bedside. Its smoke curled like a prayer unspoken. He lay down not as one who had finished the day, but as one folded gently into its arms, and outside the moon rose above the monastery, its silver light bathing the stone, a quiet benediction. No applause, no revelation, only the eternal turning, only the breath of God in the wind, the memory of chant in the walls, and the soul still awake, listening. Perhaps the stone was never outside. Perhaps the monastery was never made of walls. And maybe, just maybe, the journey was the transformation all along. So if gold was never the point, what was? Perhaps it was this: the silence, the flame, the breath, the remembering, the return.